It's really a rare opportunity that we have today to explore the public areas of this grand mansion. I'd like to thank my partners for pulling all the historical information together. That was Bob Ellis, the Society historian, Brian Smith, who created that video 20 years ago and is more relevant now than it probably was 20 years ago, and Ellen Racine for pulling together a folder of a lot of old pictures of the mansion and the like. What we have out in the bar area is 20 minutes, the first 20 minutes of Brian's video, but we also have the disc of the 90-minute CDs of the 90-minute presentation that for a small donation you can grab and take one home. And Bob Ellis helped me a lot with this. I really appreciate it. This mansion was originally built by Daniel B. Wesson of Smith & Wesson fame when he was 61 years old, and it was built in the late 1880s. It was built as a summer home. You can imagine his permanent home. I had heard that this is only one of the 10 mansions that he built. It's also the only one that's left. As you can tell, Mr. Wesson was a very wealthy man. This is a result of a successful firearms business that he based in Springfield, Massachusetts. The estate originally contained some 100 acres with stables for expensive horses, carriage roads, ponds, bridges, fountains, a large greenhouse, housing for the employees, and a sophisticated water system that pumped water from Bartlett Pond to the mansion grounds. And if you look at the different posters we set up, there's different topics, and one of them is just on the water system. I think it's the one back there, which is pretty sophisticated for that time. The story of White Cliffs began in March of 1840, when Captain Cyrus Gale agreed to rent a shop near the Assabet River on Northborough to a gunsmith who had been working in Grafton. This gunsmith was Daniel Wesson's older brother, Edwin. Edwin was already known as the best rifle maker in the area, and especially for target practice. In 1843, 3 years later, 18-year-old Daniel Wesson became his apprentice. While learning the trade, Daniel fell in love with Cynthia Hawes, who lived a bit further down the road on Main Street in Northborough. We know that her father did not believe that Daniel had much of a future. He is quoted as saying that Daniel was a mere gunsmith with no future. As a result, Cynthia and Daniel eloped to Connecticut in 1847, where Edwin had moved his business. After Edwin's early death at the age of 37, Daniel stayed in the firearms industry. The same year, while working as a subcontractor in Vermont, he met Horace Smith of the other part of Smith & Wesson. They decided to set up their own business, but it failed a few years later. They sold their technology to Oliver Winchester, and their technology became a basic design in the famous Winchester repeating rifle. Several years after that, Smith & Wesson met again. They started their second company, and this was based on their newly designed small revolver that used their patented cartridge. They built their manufacturing facility in Springfield, and with the onset of the Civil War, their business grew rapidly. By 1865, they both had reported incomes of $160,000. They made them both the wealthiest men in Springfield at the time. In the early 1880s, after the death of his wife's parents, Daniel agreed to his wife's request that they build a summer home near her childhood home in Northborough. After the death of the Wessons, a newspaper article, there was a quote that the Hawes, they lived upon part of the premise of the present Wesson mansion. Their old well now beneath the rustic pagoda-like structure near the street. Many of you probably remember the structure, which was removed at the time of the construction of Stratton Way in 1993. And there are pictures of it in the book, and there's pictures of it in the video, and I think it'll come to mind to anyone who's in town before 1993. After the completion of the mansion in 1886, they came to Northborough every summer until about 1901, when their healths began to fail. We have some information in the files regarding Mr. Wesson from the locals who were interviewed shortly after his death in 1906. Mr. Charles Anson Rice noted that Daniel Wesson and his brother were quite quiet, sober, and industrious. He also commented about the lion fountain that Daniel Wesson gave to the town. It appears there was a dispute over its location. This is a quote. So this caused the placement of the Lion Fountain to rupture within the community. The Wesson Fountain had a sort of cold reception. What would have become of the thing, the Lord only knows, if certain enterprising citizens had not assembled one night when the greater part of Northborough was sound asleep and firmly planted that fountain where it has since remained, directly in front of the town hall. Another fellow, a Mr. Henry Leonard, who was also interviewed, turns out he was the superintendent of Daniel Wesson's property here. And he mentioned, "I have never met a more kindly man. He was just in all his dealings with his fellows, and his death was a great loss to his family and friends. He took a great interest in his conservatory, said to be one of the finest buildings of its kind in the state, while his powerhouse for the water supply was also a favorite structure." And on one of the posters we have a picture of the greenhouse, which was huge, which is now where the bank, there's a bank right at the corner of Maple Street and Main Street. After the death of Daniel and Cynthia, there was a newspaper article in 1910 and reported that Alfred Thomas was born in England and settled in Worcester, and he had bought the property for somewhat less than the $1 million that supposedly it cost to build it. Thomas retained everything except the water rights at Bartlett Pond, because by this time, town water was available. He was quoted as saying that, "The place appealed to me because of its English style. The mansion looks like English, and the surrounding are decidedly English. I have a fancy for that kind of style. An Englishman is brought up to like trees and flowers about him, and that's just what appeals to me most on this property." And now, Hillary, is that true? Is it true?
For a second.
Well, this fellow bought the property because he was English, and this reminded him of being an Englishman.
Doesn't look like my husband.
That's too bad. So, Mr. Thomas, who bought it, he was a manufacturer and a vice president of the street railway in Worcester. And he used this also as a summer home. And he used it till 1926. At that point, the greenhouse was then sold and removed from the site. Thereafter, the White Cliffs had a whole variety of other owners, but essentially since World War II era, it served as a site for social functions, weddings, and as a restaurant. The large function room and kitchen in the back were added in 1969. I bet a lot of people here know about that. After World War II, Warren Drive and St. James Drive, they were built, and they were developed just on the outside of those large fences, that the stone walls that you see on Main Street. Wesson's buildings that are across Main Street and on Maple Street served as home for different businesses. The outer ring of White Cliffs, that gave way to the new street, Stratton Way, which kind of circles this building now, in 1993. At that time, some of the remaining features, such as the enclosed well near Main Street, the well-defined pool bed near the Assabet River, have all disappeared. We must now look at the old photographs and at Brian Smith's tape to see these old features. So on that note, I really leave you to look at the old photographs that we have on the table right here that we've collected. Look at the posters, Brian's video, and look at all the detail of the craftsmanship while you're in this building. And we can really appreciate the summer home of Daniel and Cynthia Wesson. Thank you.